Okay, so we're looking at IELTS Task 1 essay, and we're analysing figures without the flow of time, okay, and this time they've given us a bar chart, okay? Love a good bar chart, pretty simple usually to analyse. So the chart below shows the amount of leisure time enjoyed by men and women of different employment status. Write a report for a university lecturer describing the information shown below, okay? So describing it, pulling out the most important information. So usually when we're doing the IELTS Task 1, first we want to sort of paraphrase what the chart is showing us. 2, we want to give our overview of the general trends, okay, of the general most important trends. And then we want to give details, okay? So usually these will be combined into one paragraph, okay? And then we'll have details 1 and then details 2, usually. Okay, so let's have a look at this graph. Now, I took a scan at this graph before I started. I might get in trouble for this. I'm not a fan of this, whatever this graph is showing. I don't think it must have been produced a really long time ago because I don't think it's totally accurate. So it's showing leisure time in a typical week by sex and employment status, so 1998 to 1999. So it's kind of old, but I feel like whoever made this up has got some issues, okay? So hours of leisure time going up here, so 20 hours per week, 40 hours a week, 60 hours a week and more, okay? So we've got men in the dark bars and then females in the lighter bars. So you can see every category has got some females, but only 3 categories have got men. So we've got employed full-time, employed part-time, just women, because apparently men don't have part-time jobs. And then no students. Students are part-time. I mean, you know, okay, sure, only ladies are part-time jobs. Unemployed, retired, and then housewives, only women. So, I mean, listen, maybe I'm biased because when I was a kid, my dad was at home looking after us and my mum was working. So this is not crazy in the 90s to have a man looking after the kids. It's totally possible. We are living in the year 2022. I don't know what country this data's from, okay, but it's not necessarily housewives, but usually we would say now stay-at-home parent, okay? So sometimes my students who I've had from I know that in some countries it's very, very unusual for the man to stay home with the children, and usually it's the women. And that's the case across all countries. Usually it is the mother who stays at home with the children and works part-time. That is true. But I think it's not 100% true, and it's not the case for all people. So to show a graph where there's not even a tiny number, do you know what I mean? Just to acknowledge that there are some families where that does happen. My family was one example of that. So a lot of my students, when I used to teach in Japan, there's a special Japanese word for the housewife or the mother who stays at home. And so they were asking, what should they do? Should they say housewife? Okay. So yeah, housewife now is kind of seen as more old-fashioned. Okay. And so usually we would say now stay-at-home parent or stay-at-home parents. Okay, because that's a bit more gender neutral, and that allows for the fact that sometimes it's men who stay at home and sometimes it's women who stay at home with the children. Okay, and it depends on the type of family that you have. Okay, so in some couples, you know, it depends on the situation. So I just have an issue with the fact that only ladies are housewives and only ladies work part-time. Now, is it usually the majority are part-time? Are women? That is true, okay? The majority of people who stay at home, but I just don't like that this graph is showing 100% only. There's 3 things you can do as a man. You can be full-time employed, unemployed, or retired, okay? I just don't think that's the case, especially in modern society. And there is, you must have heard maybe of like the gig economy, okay? Where people are doing several part-time jobs. So maybe you're working as a delivery driver and then also running like an online store and then also doing some freelance consulting work. You know, this idea that you're just doing lots of part-time jobs together. That's something that's big now in the UK and in the US, okay? So this idea that it's only women who are doing part-time, this is a very, very old-fashioned graph. And even in the 90s, I think some men were doing part-time work, okay? You know, what if there's some men out there who are disabled or who are going back to school, or men who are single fathers, you know, and are looking after the kids. But anyway, sorry, I'm just going off on this this rant. And so if I had this picture in the IELTS exam, I would just write that and be like, your graph is wrong. But okay, we're not here to analyze the gender politics or the economic realities of this graph, okay? Someone's made up this graph and they think men can only be full-time, unemployed, or retired. Sorry, men, you can't work part-time. Sorry, men, you can't help look after the children even if you want to. But I don't know. Maybe this will make it into the video. Maybe someone will edit this out. This is just my personal feeling. Okay, so let's look and see some general trends. Okay, so the first thing you want to do when you look at these graphs is you want to see what are the sort of major things that I'm going to talk about. So first thing you can talk about, okay, there's two categories where there's only women. Okay, and there's 3 categories where we've got men. Okay, so I would, that's the first trend I would focus on. Okay, there's more men than women in these 3 categories, and there's more women than men in only 2 categories. Okay, so that's one difference you can talk about. The other one is the categories where we've got the most amount of leisure time. Okay, so unemployed and retired people have the most amount of leisure time. Okay, while people who are working have less leisure time. And I'd also like to say, if you're at home looking after the kids, I don't believe you have this much free time as a housewife, cooking, cleaning, looking after the children, doing errands, picking up the kids from school. These are all busy. I don't count that as leisure time. So I would say that you should have at least as much leisure time as someone who works full time. But again, we're not here to critique the realities of the graph. Okay, we're here to get an IELTS score. So let's see how you get this IELTS score. Let's see what this candidate's done. According to this chart from 1998 to 1999, this is data. This is A data, so this is data. It's uncountable. This is data about hours of leisure time enjoyed by males and females of differing employment status. Okay. First of all, it shows 5 types of leisure time in a week, including employed, full-time, employed, part-time, and housewives. Okay, so it's not showing 5 types of leisure time. It's showing 5 types of employment and the amount of leisure time they have during a week. Okay, there are women in every statistic. 2 of this chart, there were no male data. Okay, so they're trying to explain that there are some categories. Okay, so women are counted, or women are shown in every category, whereas under part-time and housewives, and housewife, there is no male data. Okay, so that would be a better way to express that. Okay, therefore we can infer. Okay, present tense, we're inferring right now. We can infer now. Okay, so even though the data is in the past tense, we want to infer now, so it should be present tense. We can infer that women are worked most of the time. This is unclear. And also, you don't really need to infer anything for task 1. You just need to describe the data. You don't need to interpret it, and you don't really need to analyze it. Women are worked most of the time. This is unclear. Women are worked is the phrase. I'm unclear what you mean. Are worked by who? Are working where? I think they're trying to say, this candidate, that women are working more than men because they're in more categories. But that's not really what the data is showing us. We don't know how many women are in the data. We can just see how much free time they had. The figure for unemployed and retired, both males and females, were the same. Not only that, they are all the highest in this table. Okay, so again, they're trying to explain this first difference. Okay. Okay, so you would say something like the groups with the most leisure time were unemployed and retired, where both men and women had more than, okay, and then whatever the hours were, okay. However, in both categories, men had more leisure time than women. Okay, so that will be a much clearer way of expressing what they're trying to say. Through this data, female housewives' leisure time is higher than the leisure time of employed people, while female housewives was higher than males unemployed full-time. On the whole house of leisure time, women's data combined more than men's data combined. This sentence, I don't know. I'm not quite sure what the candidate's trying to say. This is confusing the whole house of leisure time. Women's data combined more than men's data combined. But what data? Like the number of women, the amount of leisure time? Because if we look back at this graph, it's not actually telling us how many men or women are in each category, okay? There could be 6 people in this category and 26 people that they asked for this category. They're just looking at leisure time, okay? And saying men have got more leisure time than women when they're employed full-time. So I'm not really sure what data they're referring to here, so that's unclear, okay? All right, so this candidate's given it a good go. Like I can really see that they have pulled out some of the more important features, but what they really need to work on is expressing that in the clearest way possible, okay? So for task achievement, I'm going to have to give them down as a 4 because they've tried, but they don't really have an overview and they've not really clearly explained the data, okay? So they really need to work on clarity, okay, and organization of information. Okay, so when I say organization, tackling each theme individually, okay? And this can take a little bit of planning, okay? So take a minute before you start writing to make a little memo plan. What trends are you going to talk about in what order? So it's very, very clear when I'm reading through it that you're talking about this trend, then that trend, then the next trend, okay? Coherence and cohesion. I think, again, I would give a 4.0 just because sometimes it was hard to follow, okay? And the data wasn't always linked. Missing some linking going on here, okay? Vocabulary, okay? Again, I think probably would be a 4.5. The vocabulary they did, it was kind of, adequate for what they were trying to do. They did sort of try and paraphrase a couple of times, but this can it wasn't always used clearly. And then grammar, I sort of would have to put down as a 4.0 or maybe a little bit lower because there were times where I couldn't understand what you had to say. Okay, so problems were that there were some sentences which I pointed out were unclear. Okay, not all of them, just a couple where I couldn't quite guess what you were trying to say. Okay, so overall, I think this is coming out at a 4.0. Okay, but I don't want this candidate to worry too much about it because I feel like this is probably quite an early effort at an IELTS Task 1 essay, okay? Things that this candidate can definitely improve on, first off, is grammar, okay? And I would just check your basic sentence structures, okay? So when you're practicing for your Task 1, practice the basic type of sentences where you're comparing data and describing data, okay? There's a very clear pattern. This is increasing because, or this is more than blank. The male data is higher than the female data. Okay, so those kind of basic sentence structures will instantly help you do a much clearer essay. And the other one I would get them to focus on is task achievement. Okay, and get them to really focus on the structure of a Task 1 essay. Okay, and how to pick out data. Okay, how to pick the trends to talk about. If they can really improve those two areas, then the vocabulary and cohesions will naturally get higher. Okay, so overall, I think they gave it a good go. But there's definitely some areas where they can go and work on and areas to improve.